I'm William. I'm in my 40s now, and I've spent a lot of years pretending I was just an unlucky guy who made bad decisions. But if I'm being accurate, I wasn't unlucky. I was the reason other people had bad luck. There's a phrase I heard years ago while working around shipping yards and warehouses. Missing cargo is a shipment that has disappeared without a trace. People say it casually, almost like it's weather. Boxes get misplaced. Containers get delayed. Numbers get typed wrong. Somewhere, someone shrugs and says, "Things happen." Back then I used to hear that phrase and think about spreadsheets, insurance claims, angry customers. I didn't think about the people behind it. I didn't think about the guy waiting for inventory that never arrived. Or the owner of a small business who suddenly had to explain to employees why paychecks would be late. I definitely didn't think about guilt. Because years ago, before my hair started going gray and before I learned how long a night can actually feel, I became part of the reason cargo went missing. I wasn't some criminal mastermind. I wasn't a movie character with fake passports and offshore accounts. I was broke. Broke in the kind of way where you start calculating how many meals you can skip before it becomes noticeable. I had debt. I had rent breathing down my neck. I had people calling me every day asking for money I didn't have. And then I met people who had a very simple view of the world. If something is already moving through the system, nobody notices if it moves somewhere else first. I wish I could say I argued. I wish I could say I walked away. But I remember exactly what I said. I asked how much money was involved. I remember sitting in this greasy little diner near the industrial district 2 nights later. One of those places where coffee tastes burnt, and every table looks permanently sticky no matter how much they wipe it down. The guy across from me was named Eric. I still don't know if that was his real name. He had this irritating calmness about him, like nothing in the world could surprise him. While I was chewing through panic and overdue bills, he looked like a man discussing weekend plans. He talked in vague sentences. Never dramatic, never threatening. Stuff gets redirected all the time. Systems have blind spots. People only notice what they expect to see. I kept waiting for him to describe some grand criminal operation. He didn't. That almost made it worse. Because he made it sound ordinary. And ordinary things are easier to justify. I remember staring at my coffee thinking, if this were really dangerous, why does it sound so normal? The thing people get wrong is they imagine a moment where someone gets dragged into crime kicking and screaming. Like there's some dramatic scene where you say no 5 times before giving in. For me, it happened in tiny steps. Eric never sat me down and said, "William, we're going to steal something." Instead, he asked for favors. Small things. Double-check a schedule. Be around at certain times. Notice routines. I started telling myself I was just helping with logistics. Just helping people move information around. Even now that sounds ridiculous, but back then I clung to that excuse like it was a life raft. The dangerous thing about crossing lines isn't the line itself. It's that from far away, the line barely looks real. I'd go home after meeting him and stare at the ceiling for hours. Because deep down, beneath all the excuses and desperation, I already knew something. Normal jobs don't come with this much silence. A week later I was already noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. Not because anyone ordered me to, but because my brain had started changing without me realizing it. I noticed who looked exhausted at work and who looked alert. I noticed who rushed through routines and who took their time. I noticed which people complained constantly, and which people barely spoke at all. That bothered me later. Because I realized I'd stopped looking at people like people. I was looking at them like pieces on a board. I'd catch myself doing it and immediately feel sick about it. Then I'd remember my overdue bills sitting on the kitchen counter and tell myself I was overthinking things. Funny how quickly fear can negotiate with your conscience. Every night I kept making the same promise. I'll hear them out, see what this is, and walk away if it feels wrong. I said that promise so many times I started believing it. A few days after that, Eric finally stopped speaking in circles. Not completely, though. That was his style. He'd hand you one piece and wait for your brain to assemble the rest. Looking back, I think that was intentional. If nobody says the whole thing out loud, everybody gets to pretend they're innocent. We met in his car outside a warehouse district while rain tapped against the windshield. He slid a folder onto the center console and just looked at me. No speech. No dramatic music. Just paper. I remember opening it and feeling my stomach drop a little. Not because of what was inside specifically, but because of what it meant. Up until then I'd been living in a world of vague ideas and half-truths. This felt real. And reality has weight to it. I sat there staring at those pages while part of me was screaming to hand everything back and get out of the car. The other part was already calculating what money could fix. I drove home with that folder sitting on the passenger seat like it weighed 50 pounds. I didn't open it again right away. Sounds stupid, I know. But as long as it stayed closed, I could pretend there was still distance between me and whatever I was becoming. Once I started reading every page, every note, every scribbled detail, there'd be no pretending anymore. I made dinner and barely touched it. Turned the TV on and couldn't tell you what was playing. Kept looking over at that folder. It's strange what fear does. I always thought fear would feel loud, racing heartbeat, shaking hands, panic. But sometimes fear is quiet. Sometimes it just sits beside you on the couch and waits. Around midnight I finally opened it. And I remember the exact feeling I had. Not excitement. Not greed. Disappointment. Because by then I already knew I wasn't opening it to decide whether I'd do this. I was opening it because some part of me had already decided. What hit me first wasn't the details. It was how ordinary everything looked. No movie stuff. No maps with circles and arrows. No secret codes. Just schedules, names, dates, routine paperwork, the kind of things thousands of people look at every day and immediately forget. I sat there at my kitchen table reading through it all while the clock kept ticking past 1 in the morning. And I remember having this weird thought. Someone built all of this so people could trust it. Systems only work because everyone quietly agrees they work. Trucks arrive where they're supposed to arrive. People scan things, sign forms, move on with their day. Nobody stands around wondering if reality itself is being nudged a few inches to the left. I should have felt alarmed. Instead, I felt something worse. I felt myself getting comfortable. Because once something starts feeling familiar, your brain stops asking whether it's right. It starts asking whether it's possible. Over the next few days, I started carrying that feeling around with me everywhere. You know that sensation when you're waiting for a doctor to call with test results? Like your life is moving normally on the outside, but underneath everything there's this constant pressure humming in the background. That was me. I'd be standing in line buying groceries, nodding at cashiers, talking to coworkers, acting like everything was normal. Meanwhile, my mind was somewhere else. I kept telling myself I still had a choice. That I could back out whenever I wanted. I repeated that thought so often it became a ritual. But then I noticed something uncomfortable. I wasn't imagining backing out anymore. I was imagining what happened after. The dead disappearing. Sleeping through the night. Not feeling panic every time my phone rang. That scared me more than anything. Because I realized I wasn't wrestling with the idea anymore. I was starting to picture a future built on it. Preparation started happening before I even admitted to myself that's what it was. I told myself I was just being careful. Just observing. Just understanding the situation. Funny how people rename things when they want to live with themselves. I started paying attention to my own habits too. What time I woke up. Where I usually stopped after work. Who expected to hear from me and when. I wasn't building some genius plan. I was building excuses. Excuses in advance. If anyone asked questions, I wanted answers ready. If somebody remembered seeing me somewhere, I wanted it to sound ordinary. That was the part that made me uneasy. Not because it felt dangerous. Because it felt natural. I'd catch myself preparing for conversations that hadn't happened yet, rehearsing reactions in my head. And every now and then I'd stop and think, when did I become somebody who practices lying before anyone even asks a question? The day everything moved from thoughts into reality felt weirdly ordinary. I expected some huge moment. Thunder outside, dramatic tension, some feeling that my life was splitting into a before and after. Instead, I woke up tired. I shaved, got dressed, drank terrible coffee, and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I remember thinking I looked exactly the same. That unsettled me. Because I'd always imagined people on the edge of doing something terrible looked different somehow. Like guilt would leave fingerprints on your face before you crossed the line. But I just looked like William. Regular guy. Tired eyes. Wrinkled shirt. On the drive over, I kept turning the radio volume up and down without realizing it. My hands were steady, but my thoughts weren't. I kept asking myself one question over and over. If you still know this is wrong, why are you still driving? And I never gave myself an answer. By the time I arrived, my heart had settled into this strange rhythm where I wasn't panicking anymore, and somehow that scared me even more. People were moving around, talking, carrying on with their routines. Laughing. Complaining about work. One guy was arguing with someone over the phone about dinner plans. That messed with me. Because I'd built this whole thing up in my head like stepping into another world, but reality didn't care. Reality just kept moving. Nobody looked at me twice. Nobody pointed and said, "That guy doesn't belong here." I remember standing there thinking how terrifyingly easy it is to disappear into ordinary life. I kept waiting for some instinct inside me to pull the emergency brake. For guilt to suddenly hit hard enough to stop me. Instead, I got something else. Adrenaline. Not the movie version either. Just this cold, sharp feeling that made every sound around me seem louder than normal. The strange thing about crossing a line is that once you actually do it, the world doesn't stop. No alarms suddenly went off. No dramatic music started playing. For a few minutes everything around me kept moving exactly like before, and that almost made me relax. Almost. Then something small happened. A guy I barely knew walked over and started talking to me. Just normal conversation. Asking how things were going, complaining about being tired, joking about wanting to go home early. I can't even remember his name now. But I remember every second of that conversation. Because while he was casually talking, my brain was falling apart. I kept thinking, does he know? Am I acting strange? Why is he looking at me like that? He probably noticed absolutely nothing. But guilt does something ugly to your head. It convinces you every glance lasts too long. Every smile becomes suspicion. Every ordinary moment starts feeling like a trap. I thought fear would hit during the act itself. It didn't. Fear showed up afterward. Hours later, when I was alone. That's when my mind started replaying everything like a broken recording. Every conversation. Every look. Every tiny detail I barely noticed at the time. Then I remembered something. That guy from earlier, the one talking about dinner plans. At one point he'd stopped and looked at me for a second before asking if I was okay. Just a normal question. At the time I'd laughed and said I was tired. Now, sitting alone in my apartment, I kept hearing it again. "You okay?" Over and over. I started wondering whether my face had given something away. Whether I'd sounded nervous. Whether people remembered things they normally wouldn't remember. That night I barely slept. Because once you do something you can't take back, your brain becomes your worst enemy. And mine had started building cases against me. The next morning I expected police at my door. Seriously. Every sound outside my apartment felt personal. Elevator doors opening. Cars slowing down outside. Footsteps in the hallway. I'd look through the peephole like some paranoid idiot and see a neighbor carrying groceries or a delivery guy checking addresses. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And somehow that was worse. Because fear I understood. Waiting was different. Waiting gave my imagination room to work. Then calls started coming in around work. People talking about delays, missing records, confusion, questions nobody had answers for. The word missing kept coming up. I remember hearing it and feeling my stomach twist. Because up until then, everything had felt abstract. Numbers, schedules, paperwork. But now people sounded stressed, frustrated. Real human voices attached themselves to what had happened. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about whether I'd get caught. I started thinking about what I'd actually done. People always ask questions about stories like this. Did you get caught? Was it worth it? Would you do it again? The truth is more complicated than people expect. I never got dragged out of my apartment in handcuffs. I never had some dramatic moment where everything collapsed at once. But getting away with something isn't always freedom. Because after that, I noticed something had changed inside me. Not overnight. Slowly. I stopped trusting people because I knew how easy it was to lie. I started wondering what other people were hiding because I knew what I had hidden. I'd look in mirrors and see the same face, but I stopped feeling like the same person. That's the part nobody sells you. You can outrun consequences on paper sometimes. You can't outrun yourself. If anyone reading this is standing near a line and thinking one step won't matter, understand something. The first thing you lose usually isn't your future. It's your ability to recognize yourself.